She was fire the whole world bowed to, except one. The boy of ice who could put out her flames. They called it a danger. Neither saw it coming. Our story begins now. The rain had been falling against the windows of the burrow for 3 hours, and Hermione Granger lay awake counting each drop as it broke apart on the glass. She had always done this when sleep refused her, turned to numbers, to the orderly comfort of things that could be measured. Tonight, the counting did not help. There was a heat under her skin that had nothing to do with the summer storm, a low and unfamiliar warmth that pooled at the base of her spine and crept outward like spilled tea soaking through parchment. She pressed her palm flat against her sternum and felt her own heartbeat answer back. Too fast, too loud, a drumming that did not belong to the quiet girl who had read herself to sleep beneath this same patched quilt for the past 2 summers. The clock on the nightstand showed 3 minutes to midnight. 3 minutes to 18. She did not know why that mattered. Birthdays had never frightened her. They were a line drawn on the long ledger of a life, nothing more. And yet, some animal part of her, some buried instinct she could not name, had been bracing all evening as though for the lifting of a curse or the breaking of a dam. The warmth in her chest deepened. It was not unpleasant. That was the strange thing, the thing that would haunt her afterward. It was almost sweet, like sinking into a bath drawn just past the edge of comfort, like the moment before sleep when the body finally surrenders its weight. The clock ticked. 2 minutes. She sat up. Across the small room Ginny slept on, one arm flung above her head, her breathing slow and even. The Weasley house creaked around them, settling in the wet dark, and somewhere below, a window had been left ajar so that the smell of soaked earth and crushed garden mint drifted up the stairs. Hermione knew that smell as well as she knew her own name. It had never once made her dizzy before. It made her dizzy now. She rose and crossed to the window on legs that did not feel entirely her own. The garden lay silver and streaming below, the gnome holes flooded, the rusted weather vane on the shed turning and turning, though there was no wind. She watched her own reflection assemble itself in the dark glass. The wild hair, the wary eyes, the face she had long ago made peace with not loving. And she waited. The clock struck 12. It did not hurt. She would remember that too with a kind of shame, because part of her had expected pain, had braced for it the way she braced for everything. And instead, what came was a flood of warmth so total and so consuming that her knees buckled and she had to grip the windowsill to keep upright. It moved through her like sunrise moves across a field, unhurried, inevitable, gilding everything it touched, her fingertips, her throat, the roots of her hair. For one suspended moment, she was not a body at all, but a lit thing, a held breath of light, and the rain on the glass seemed to slow and hang like a curtain of crystal beads. Then it passed, and she was only herself again, kneeling on the cold floorboards with her heart slamming against her ribs. But she was not only herself. She knew it before she understood it. She knew it the way you know a room has changed even before you can say what has moved. When she lifted her hand to her face, her own skin smelled different, warmer, sweeter, threaded through with something that made her own breath catch in her throat. When she stood and caught her reflection again, the wary girl was still there, but there was a luminosity to her now, a faint, banked glow beneath the surface of the skin, as though a candle had been lit behind a screen of parchment and left to burn. "What," she whispered to the dark, "is happening to me?" The dark did not answer, but Ginny stirred. Hermione turned. Across the room, her friend had come awake with a suddenness that was not natural, sitting bolt upright with her eyes wide and unfocused in the gloom. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence. "Hermione!" Ginny's voice was strange, slow, dreamy, stripped of its usual quick mischief. "You're—" She stopped. She was staring, not at Hermione's face, but at all of her, a slack and helpless attention, the way a starving person stares at bread. "You're so— I never noticed how—" "Ginny." Cold fear now, threading through the unfamiliar heat. "Ginny, go back to sleep. You're dreaming." "I'm not dreaming." Ginny pushed back the covers and stood, and there was something terribly wrong in the way she moved, drawn forward without choosing it, her bare feet finding the floor as though pulled by a current beneath it. "I just want to be near you. Is that— Why does that feel so—" "Stop." Hermione backed against the window. The glass was cold through her nightdress. Her own skin was burning. "Stop, please. This isn't you. This isn't—" And then a worse thing happened. Below them, in the dark heart of the sleeping house, a door opened. Footsteps on the stairs, several sets, uneven, stumbling, the heavy, unbalanced tread of people walking while half asleep. Ron's voice, thick and bewildered, calling her name into the dark. Harry's behind it, and Mr. Weasley, and the twins' old room emptying, and the whole house waking and turning toward her, like flowers turning toward a sun, drawn up out of their beds by a pull none of them had agreed to, and none of them could name. The heat in Hermione's chest flared white, because under the fear, beneath the horror of it, something else had surfaced. A hot, sick flicker of wrongness made flesh. The violation of seeing the people she loved most reduced to sleepwalking want. And the Veela blood, awake now and untaught and utterly without governance, did what the blood does when its bearer is afraid. It caught fire. She felt it leave her before she understood she was the source. A pulse of scorching air burst outward from her body in a ring, and the window behind her cracked from edge to edge with a sound like breaking ice. The lamp on the nightstand flared and shattered. Ginny cried out and stumbled back, the dreamy pull broken by the simpler instinct of fear, and on the stairs the footsteps halted and someone shouted in alarm. Hermione looked down at her own hands. They were wreathed in flame, not burning. That was the impossible thing. The fire licked along her fingers and curled around her wrists, and did not consume her, golden white and alive, casting leaping shadows up the walls of the small room. She could feel it as an extension of her own fury and fear, as immediate as a clenched fist, and she understood with a plunging terror that she did not know how to make it stop. The harder she grasped for calm, the brighter it burned. Her panic was fuel. Her shame was fuel. Every frantic effort to control it only fed the thing she was trying to smother. "Hermione!" Ron's face appeared in the doorway, gone slack-jawed with the same helpless yearning that had taken Ginny, and then bleached white with terror as he saw the flames. "Bloody Dad! Stay back!" Her own voice came out warped, lower and stranger than she had ever heard it, ringing with something ancient. She pressed herself into the corner, made herself as small as she could, as though she could fold her body around the fire and contain it by sheer will. All of you, stay back. I can't. I don't know how to. The garden mint, the wet earth, the slow rain. She reached for those familiar things, for the orderly girl who counted raindrops, for the cool, sane self she had been only minutes before. Breathe, think. There is a cause and there is a cure, and you will find it the way you find everything. You will read until you understand. But she could not think. Thinking required a stillness she no longer possessed, and the fire fed on every spark of feeling, and she had spent her whole life feeling things fiercely and hiding it well. There was nowhere left to hide it now. It poured out of her in light and heat, and the curtains caught, and Mr. Weasley was shouting aguamenti, and the whole house had become noise, and water, and her own terrible, inextinguishable glow. She squeezed her eyes shut. And in the red dark behind her lids, with the heat roaring and her friends crying out, and her own self slipping further and further from her grasp, one absurd, unbidden, ice-cold thought surfaced from nowhere. A face, pale and composed and unmoved. The one face in all the world that had never once looked at her with want, and never once looked at her with warmth either. The boy whose contempt had been the most reliably cool thing she had ever known. She did not understand why she thought of him. She would not understand for weeks. But in that moment, drowning in her own fire, what she remembered was the grey and frozen calm of Draco Malfoy's eyes, and how, for one impossible instant, the flames seemed to gutter at the memory, as though they too had felt the cold. Then Mr. Weasley's water charm broke over her at last, and the room went dark, and Hermione Granger sank to the floor in the steam and the ruin and wept. 300 miles to the north, in a manor house emptied by war and shame, Draco Malfoy woke from a dreamless sleep, with the inexplicable conviction that somewhere, very far away, something had just gone badly wrong. He lay in the dark and listened to his own steady heartbeat, and could not say why his palms had gone cold. He did not know her blood had woken. He did not know that of every soul in Britain, his was the one that would not bend. He knew only that the night felt suddenly, strangely charged, the way the air goes taut and metallic in the breathless seconds before lightning splits the sky, and that, for reasons he could not name, sleep did not come again until dawn. The corridors of Hogwarts had never frightened her before. Hermione had walked these stone passages for 7 years, through war and peace, through terror and triumph, and she knew them the way she knew the spines of her favourite books, by feel, in the dark, without looking. The flagstones worn smooth by 10 centuries of feet, the particular cold that pooled in the dungeon stairwells, the way the morning light came slantwise through the high windows of the charms corridor and laid bars of gold across the floor. This had been the one place in all the world where she felt entirely herself. Now she pressed her back to a pillar in the empty third-floor passage, her heart going like a hunted thing, and waited for the corridor to clear so she could move without being seen. It had been 6 weeks since the night her blood woke. 6 weeks of learning, in small, humiliating increments, exactly how dangerous she had become. The ministry had sent a witch from the beings division, a brisk, kind, exhausted woman named Mrs. Tonks's cousin or some such, Hermione could no longer remember, who had taken one look at her glowing skin and her scorched bedroom and pronounced the diagnosis with the weariness of someone delivering it for the 100th time. A late awakening. Quarter blood, Veela, dormant through the maternal line, triggered at majority. There were records, apparently. A great-grandmother in the south of France who had married a quiet English doctor and buried her nature so thoroughly that 3 generations had grown up never knowing it ran in their blood at all. It had skipped Hermione's grandmother. It had skipped her mother. It had waited, patient as a seed under frost, for 18 years and one storm-soaked midnight. And now it would not go back to sleep. She had read everything. Of course she had read everything. It was the only weapon she had ever trusted. She had emptied the relevant shelf of the Hogwarts library and 3 owl-ordered volumes besides, and she knew now in clinical detail what she was. She knew that the allure, the pull that turned heads and emptied beds and reduced grown wizards to sleepwalkers, was involuntary and constant, and could be muffled, but never wholly silenced. She knew that it was strongest in moments of high feeling. And she knew the other thing, the worst thing, the thing the books described in the flat, dispassionate language of magical taxonomy, that a Veela's wrath manifested as fire, and that an untrained Veela in the grip of true fury was a danger to everyone within reach. Knowing it had not helped. That was the cruelty of it. For the first time in her life, Hermione Granger had read the entire text and understood every word, and still could not control the outcome. A door opened somewhere down the corridor. Hermione went very still. 2 third-years emerged, a boy and a girl, mid-argument over some trivial thing. And then the boy's head came up, sharp as a hound catching scent, and he turned toward her hiding place with that expression she had come to dread above all others. The slackening, the hunger, his friend's voice trailing off as she too turned, her young face going soft and lost. "Go to class," Hermione said. Her voice came out clipped, cold, deliberately ugly. She had learned that being unpleasant helped, a little, that contempt was a kind of cold water. "Go on. There's nothing here." They went, but they went slowly, looking back over their shoulders, and the boy walked into the doorframe because he could not stop staring, and Hermione pressed her burning forehead to the cool stone pillar and breathed until the heat in her chest subsided. This was her life now, slipping through the castle in the gaps between classes, eating alone in an empty room because the great hall had become unbearable, watching her friends struggle against a pull they hated and could not master. Ron, poor Ron, who could not be in a room with her for 10 minutes without his eyes going glassy and his hands going restless, and who had stopped trying because the trying shamed them both. Harry managed better than most. There was something in him, some hard-won steadiness that resisted. But even Harry could not sit beside her for long. She was the brightest witch of her age, and she had become a thing the world could not safely look at. And then there was the fire. It had come 3 more times since the burrow. Once, when a 7th-year boy had cornered her by the greenhouses, drunk on her allure, and put his hand on her arm. And the flame had answered her revulsion so fast that she had scorched a black handprint into the stone wall an inch from his head, and very nearly worse. Once at breakfast, when the whispering had grown unbearable. Once, most terribly, alone in her room, when the sheer exhausted despair of it all had boiled over, and she had woken the next morning to find her curtains gone and her bedposts charred. They had moved her to a private chamber after that, a stone room off an unused corridor with nothing in it that could burn. She slept there alone, the brightest witch of her age, walled away like a dragon in a vault. She wiped her face. She straightened her sleeve cuff, which did not need straightening, and then straightened it again and made herself walk. She was due in the headmistress's office. McGonagall had summoned her at the end of the day, and the note had been brief and gave nothing away. And Hermione had spent the intervening hours turning over every dreadful possibility. They were sending her away. They had decided she was too dangerous to keep. They would expel her, the war heroine, the cleverest girl in the school, because she could no longer be trusted not to set the dormitories alight. The gargoyle let her pass. She climbed the spiral stair with her stomach in knots, and stopped 2 steps from the top because McGonagall's office was not empty. The headmistress sat behind her desk, spectacles glinting, her expression carefully neutral in the way that always meant trouble. And in the chair before the desk, one ankle crossed over his knee, his pale hair catching the firelight, sat the last person in Britain Hermione Granger wanted to see. Draco Malfoy did not turn when she entered. He sat with the studied, insolent stillness she remembered from 100 classrooms, gazing into the middle distance as though the whole proceeding were beneath his notice. He had changed in the year since the war. She could see it even from behind, in the new sharpness of him, the way his fine clothes hung looser than they once had. But the cold was unchanged. It came off him like a draught off a window pane in January. "Professor," Hermione said, "you wanted to see me." She did not look at Malfoy. She would not give him the satisfaction. "If this is about, I've read everything there is to read. I've been managing. I haven't hurt anyone. And if you're going to tell me I have to leave, then I'd ask you to at least..." "Sit down, Miss Granger." McGonagall's voice was not unkind. "No one is sending you anywhere. Sit." There was only the one other chair beside Malfoy's. Hermione sat in it because there was nowhere else, and she felt his presence at her shoulder like the chill off the lake, and she waited. "What I am about to tell you," said the headmistress, "will be difficult to hear. I would ask you both to keep your tempers." A pause, dry as old parchment. "In Miss Granger's case, I mean that more literally than is comfortable." The fire crackled in the grate. Somewhere below, the castle bells began to toll the hour, and the slow bronze sound rolled up through the floor. "6 weeks ago," McGonagall went on, "the ministry contacted me regarding Miss Granger's condition. They were concerned, as am I, about her safety and the safety of the school. A late Veela awakening with no inherited training is, I am told, a rare and serious matter. The allure can be endured. The fire cannot. An untrained Veela who loses control in a populated castle is a catastrophe waiting to happen." Her gaze flicked briefly to the boy. "We needed a solution. We found one. It is not one any of us would have chosen." For the first time, Malfoy moved. He turned his head slowly and looked at Hermione. Really looked. Grey eyes flat and unreadable, his expression giving away precisely nothing. And she felt the strangest thing. Nothing. No pull. No answering warmth in her chest. None of the dreadful soft hunger she saw in every other face that turned her way. He looked at her the way one looks at a particularly tedious painting, and her allure broke against him and found no purchase at all. And for one disorienting moment, Hermione did not know whether to be insulted or to weep with relief. "He's immune," she said. The understanding arrived all at once. The books mentioned it, a rare hereditary resistance, certain old bloodlines. He doesn't feel it. The allure. Does he? "Don't talk about me as though I've left the room, Granger," Malfoy said. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, cool and faintly bored, the drawl smoothed by something harder underneath. "And no, I don't feel a thing. You could be the last witch in England, and I'd sooner caught the giant squid. Mr. Malfoy. Apologies, headmistress." He did not sound apologetic. Hermione's face had gone hot, and she hated that of all the things to make her flush. It was his contempt. Hated even more the cold relief running beneath the heat. "Fine," she said. "He's immune. I'm glad someone in this castle can stand to be near me without losing his mind. But I don't understand what that has to do with—" "There is more," said McGonagall. "And this is the part I would ask you to hear in full before you react." She folded her hands. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Malfoy and Miss Granger were both present in the East Corridor during an incident. Miss Granger, you will recall it. The boy by the greenhouses. Hermione remembered. The handprint scorched into stone, an inch from a boy's skull. The horror of it. The certainty that she had nearly killed someone. "What you may not have noticed," McGonagall said, "in the chaos of the moment, is that the fire stopped, abruptly, before you yourself had regained control. The portraits noted it. So did Madame Pomfrey, who reviewed the memory. The flame guttered and died the instant Mr. Malfoy came within 10 feet of you." She let that sit. "We have since tested it, carefully, under containment. The conclusion is not in doubt." The room had gone very quiet. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. "His presence," McGonagall said, "extinguishes yours. We do not fully understand the mechanism. The same resistance that shields him from the allure appears to dampen the wrath as well. Where he stands, you cannot burn. He is, as far as our research can determine, the only thing in this castle that can reliably stop you from losing control." Hermione sat absolutely still. She was aware of her own breathing. She was aware of the boy beside her, who had gone rigid in his chair, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the middle distance again. The picture of a man being marched somewhere against his will. She was aware that the world had just tilted on its axis, and that she did not yet understand which way she would fall. "No," she said. "Miss Granger, no." She was on her feet without deciding to stand. "Whatever you're about to ask, the answer is no. I will not be assigned to him like a leash, Her voice was climbing, and she could feel the warmth beginning to gather in her chest, the first ember stirring, and she clamped down on it with everything she had. There has to be another way. A potion, a charm, a ward, anything. I will not spend my final year tethered to Draco Malfoy because my blood decided to inconvenience the entire school." There is no other way." Malfoy's voice cut across hers, flat and precise as a blade laid on a table. He still had not looked at her. "Don't you think I asked? Do you imagine I want this, Granger? I have spent the last year trying to be invisible. I want one quiet year. One. And instead, I've been informed that the ministry requires me to babysit a walking bonfire because I'm the only fire blanket in Britain who happens to be allergic to your charm." His knuckles, where they gripped the arm of the chair, had gone bone white. "Believe me, if there were another way, I would have found it before you finished reading the introduction." They stared at each other. Then, two people equally trapped, equally furious, equally appalled, and the fire popped in the grate, and McGonagall watched them both over her spectacles with an expression of weary, ancient patience. "You will be given a shared timetable," she said quietly, as though neither of them had spoken at all. "Supervised hours, a common study. You need not speak. You need not pretend to like one another. You need only be near enough, often enough, that the danger is contained while Miss Granger learns control." She rose, and the firelight caught the silver in her hair. "I am sorry, truly. I know what I am asking of you both, but there are 500 children sleeping in this castle, and I will not gamble their lives on your pride." Hermione opened her mouth to argue, and felt, all at once, the ember in her chest flare hot with the sheer overwhelming injustice of it, felt the heat rush up her throat, and her fingertips begin, faintly, to glow. And beside her, without a word, without looking, Draco Malfoy shifted half an inch closer in his chair. The fire in her went out like a snuffed candle. She stood there, glowing, fading, breath caught, staring down at her own cooling hands, and at the cold, pale boy beside her, who had not so much as turned his head, and who had stopped her without trying, without wanting to, simply by being what he was. And Hermione Granger, who had an answer for everything, found that for once in her life she had nothing at all to say. The room they were given was on the 4th floor, behind a tapestry of a frost-bitten orchard that no one had walked past in years. It had been a disused study once. Hermione could tell from the bones of it, the great scarred desk shoved against one wall, the cold hearth, the high mullioned window that looked out over the lake and the dark line of the forest beyond. The house elves had cleaned it and set 2 chairs at opposite ends of the long table and lit a fire in the grate, and someone, with either kindness or cruelty, had stocked the shelves with books. It smelled of dust and beeswax and the faint green damp that lived in all the castle's older rooms. It was, McGonagall had explained, theirs now. 3 hours each evening, every evening, until Hermione learned to govern her blood. Hermione arrived first on the 2nd night, as she had on the 1st, because arriving first meant she could choose her chair and arrange her books and build a small fortress of parchment and ink between herself and the inevitable. She had brought work. She always brought work. If she was to be imprisoned here, she would at least be productive about it. She had her arithmancy and her ancient runes, and a fresh roll of parchment for the essay on hereditary magical theory she had assigned herself, because if her blood was going to ruin her life, she intended to understand it down to the last principle. She spread her things across her end of the table, with the brisk efficiency of someone who has decided not to feel anything. And she sat, and she waited, and she did not look at the door. He came at 8, as he had the night before, exactly on the hour. She heard the tapestry rings whisper along their rod. She heard his footsteps, measured, unhurried, the steps of someone who refused to seem in any kind of haste, cross the stone and stop at the far end of the table. She heard the scrape of his chair. Neither of them said a word. This was the arrangement, such as it was. They had spoken perhaps 10 sentences to one another in 2 evenings, and most of those had been on the first night and had not been kind. Stay on your side. Wasn't planning to cross it. Don't speak to me unless you're on fire. Charming. After that, silence. A vast and bristling silence, full of small sounds. The scratch of her quill, the turn of his page, the settling of the fire. And beneath all of it, the low, strange hum of his presence working on her blood, like cold water poured slowly over coals. That was the thing she could not get used to. When he was in the room, the heat in her chest banked itself. Not gone. She could still feel it, the ember of her nature glowing low and constant beneath her ribs, but quiet, governable. For the first time in 6 weeks, she could sit and think and breathe without the constant terror of ignition, and she hated that the relief of it was so total, hated that her body had begun, traitorously, to ease the moment the tapestry whispered open. She had spent 2 evenings furious at her own gratitude. She bent over her parchment and wrote. An hour passed. The fire burned down, and a house elf came and built it up again, and vanished. Outside, the early winter dark had swallowed the lake, and the window showed only their 2 reflections, far apart, each pretending the other was not there. Hermione's quill moved steadily down the page. Across the table, Malfoy had a book open before him, but she had not heard him turn a page in some time. And when she risked a glance, she found him not reading at all, but gazing into the fire with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not contempt, not boredom, but something emptied out and far away, the look of a person somewhere else entirely. He caught her looking, his face shut like a door. Problem, Granger? No. She returned to her parchment. I was simply wondering whether you'd forgotten how to read, or whether you're merely too important to bother. I was thinking. He turned a page pointedly, though she doubted he had taken in a word. You should try it. Oh, but you do nothing else, do you? The famous Granger brain grinding away. Tell me, does it ever stop? Or do you lie awake at night composing footnotes? She would not rise to it. She had promised herself she would not rise to it. The heat stirred, faint, and she breathed it down. Better a brain that works than a tongue that only knows how to wound. At least my tongue knows its wounding. He said it lightly, but there was an edge underneath, and he leaned back in his chair and regarded her down the length of the table with those flat grey eyes. You wound and pretend you don't mean to. Oh, I was only stating facts. It's a special kind of arrogance, you know, the kind that thinks it's above being cruel because it never raises its voice. The accusation landed somewhere uncomfortably close to true, and Hermione's grip tightened on her quill. I have never, she said low, been cruel to anyone who didn't earn it. No. He smiled, and it was not a nice smile. You just decide who's earned it, and the rest of us live with the verdict. very fair, very Gryffindor. The ember flared. She felt it climb, felt the first thread of warmth in her fingers, and she set the quill down very carefully and pressed her palms flat to the cool wood of the table and made herself count. 3 drops of rain. 6. 10. The heat receded, and she realized, with a fresh wave of resentment, that it receded faster than it would have on its own, that even now, even mid-argument, his presence was working on her, cooling the very fire his words had sparked. He had noticed, too. She saw it in the slight narrowing of his eyes. "There," he said. "You felt it just then. The pull. And it went out." He tilted his head. "Does it disgust you? That I'm the one who does it? It disgusts me, if it's any consolation. Of all the people in this castle, I'd have given a great deal for it to be anyone else." "Don't flatter yourself that you're a comfort," Hermione said. "You're a fire extinguisher, a cold draught. I'd take the same relief from a bucket of lake water, and I'd enjoy the conversation more." Something flickered across his face. She could not name it. It was gone too fast. But for half a second, the cool insolence cracked, and underneath there was something that looked almost like a wince, and Hermione felt an unaccountable lurch of regret. She had meant it to wound. She had wanted, in the moment, to wound. And she had, and the small, ugly satisfaction of it curdled at once into shame. "Right," he said. The mask was back, smoother than ever. "Lake water. Noted." He returned to his book and did not look up again. The silence that fell now was different from before. The bristling was gone. In its place was something heavier, more brittle, the particular quiet of 2 people who have hurt each other and are pretending it cost them nothing. Hermione stared at her parchment and could not write a word. The cruel sentence sat in the air between them, refusing to dissolve, and she found herself replaying the flicker in his face, the wince, the somewhere else look she had caught before he noticed her watching. She knew things about Draco Malfoy that she tried very hard not to know. She knew what his year had been. Everyone knew, even if no one said it. The trial, the wand snapped and then returned on probation, the manor with its empty rooms and its terrible memories, the mother who never left the grounds anymore, the father in a cell. She knew he had come back to Hogwarts because there was nowhere else to go and no one left who wanted him, and that the castle full of people who had every reason to hate him was somehow still less lonely than the house where he'd grown up. She knew that the cold she'd taken for arrogance might be the only armor a person had left when everything else had been stripped away. She knew it, and she had thrown lake water in his face anyway, because it was easier to hate him than to look at any of that directly. "Malfoy," she said. He did not look up. "Granger. That was—" She stopped. The apology stuck in her throat, thorny and unfamiliar. She was not in the habit of apologizing to people she had spent 7 years despising. "I shouldn't have said that. About the lake water. It was beneath me." A long pause. The fire ticked. "Most things are beneath you," he said, but the venom had gone out of it. It came out almost tired. He turned a page he wasn't reading. "Don't trouble yourself. I've heard worse. From better." And then, after a moment, so quietly she almost missed it. "Though I'll grant you it was a decent line. The conversation part, I'd have used it myself. It was not forgiveness. It was barely an acknowledgement." But it was the first thing he had said to her in 2 evenings that did not have a blade in it, and Hermione found, to her own bewilderment, that her chest had loosened a fraction, and not because of his cooling presence this time, but because of something warmer and far more dangerous, a small unwilling thread of recognition. Oh, she thought, he's clever. I always knew he was clever. I'd just never let myself notice he was clever like this. The quick way, the wry way, the way I am. She did not want to have noticed that. She picked up her quill. He turned his page. The fire burned. And for the rest of that hour they worked in a silence that had changed its quality entirely. No longer the silence of enemies forced into a cage, but something closer to the silence of 2 people who have, against all expectation, discovered they can stand to breathe the same air. When the bells tolled 11, Hermione gathered her things. Malfoy rose at the same moment, and they reached the door, the single narrow door behind the tapestry, at the same time, and there was an awkward shuffling pause as each waited for the other to go first. "After you," he said, with exaggerated courtesy, stepping back. "No, you... Granger, I am attempting to be civil. It's painful. Don't prolong it." She huffed something that was almost a laugh and ducked past him through the gap, and in the narrow space her shoulder brushed his arm. The briefest contact, wool against wool, there and gone. And she felt it. Not the cooling. Something else. A small bright shock that ran up her arm and bloomed warm in her chest. Nothing like the banked ember of her blood. Nothing like the icy quiet of his presence. A third thing. A new thing. Sudden and specific. And entirely her own. She froze for half a heartbeat in the doorway, close enough to smell the cold stone and cedar scent of him, close enough to see that he had gone equally still, that whatever had passed through her had registered in the sharp catch of his breath. And then she was through, out into the cold corridor, and the tapestry fell shut between them. And Hermione Granger stood alone in the dark with her heart pounding for a reason that had nothing to do with fire, pressing the sleeve he had touched as though she could feel the warmth of it still through the cloth. The trouble came on the 9th evening, and it came from outside the room. Hermione had begun, against every instinct she possessed, to look forward to the hours behind the frost orchard tapestry. She would not have admitted it under interrogation, but there was a truth in her body she could not argue with, that she slept better on the nights she had spent there, that the constant low dread of ignition had eased into something almost like calm, that the 3 hours in that dusty study had become the only part of her day when she did not have to flinch away from her own friends. She and Malfoy had settled into a wary truce. Not friendship, nothing so reckless as that, but a kind of armed coexistence, punctuated now and then by an exchange of words that surprised them both by drawing closer to conversation than to combat. He was clever. She had stopped pretending not to notice. He read more widely than she would have guessed, and argued more precisely, and twice now had said something so dry and unexpected that she had laughed before she could stop herself, and twice now she had caught the small startled flicker in his face when she did, as though the sound of her laughter were a thing he had not known to expect and did not know what to do with. But the 9th evening she did not reach the room. She was crossing the second-floor corridor on her way up, head down, books clutched to her chest, taking the long, quiet route she always took to avoid the crowds. When she came around the corner into the disused passage by the broken suit of armor and found her way blocked. There were 3 of them. Older boys, 7th years she half knew by sight, Newt students who should have been in the library. And she understood, in the cold plunge of a single instant, exactly what was wrong, because she had seen this look before, and it frightened her more than any hex. The slackness, the glassy, fixed attention, the way all 3 heads had turned toward her at once, drawn around like compass needles finding north. "There she is," one of them said, and his voice was thick and dreaming and wrong. We only wanted to look at you, Granger. Why do you always run off? Why won't you ever just get out of my way?" Hermione backed up a step. The heat in her chest stirred, the ember waking, and she clamped down on it hard. "Not here. Not now. There's no one to stop it here. All 3 of you, go back to wherever you came from. You don't want this. This isn't you. It's the allure. You're not in your right minds. Just go." But they did not go. They came forward, slow and stumbling and helpless. And the worst of it, the thing that made her stomach turn, was that they did not look malicious. They looked lost. They looked like men walking in their sleep toward a cliff they could not see. The tallest reached out a hand toward her face with an expression of dazed yearning, and Hermione flinched back against the cold stone wall, and the ember in her chest leapt. "Don't touch me," she said, and her voice had changed, dropped, gone strange and ringing. "I'm warning you. Don't." He touched her. His fingers brushed her cheek, reverent, trembling, utterly without consent on either side, and something in Hermione broke loose. The fire came up so fast she had no time to fight it. It poured out of her in a scorching wave, and the boy cried out and reeled back with his sleeves smoking, and the other 2 stumbled away shouting. The allure haze burned clean out of them by simple terror. The torches in their brackets flared. The very air went hot and bright. Hermione felt herself going, felt the orderly girl who counted raindrops dissolving into the white raw of the blood. And the more frightened she became, the higher the flames climbed, because her fear was fuel, and her shame was fuel, and her horror at what she might do was the brightest fuel of all. Her hair lifted. Her hands were lanterns. She heard one of the boys screaming for a professor, and she could not make her mouth form words to stop him, could not make herself do anything but burn, and the terrible knowledge surfaced through the roar. "I'm going to hurt them. I'm going to kill someone. There's no one here. There's no one here to stop me. Granger." The voice cut through the fire like a blade through silk. He was running. She registered it dimly through the white blaze. The tapestry corridor was 1 floor up, and he must have heard the screaming, must have come at a dead sprint, because Draco Malfoy did not run for anyone, and he was running now, skidding around the corner with his wand drawn, and his face white, and his eyes finding her in the inferno. The 3 boys fled past him down the passage. He did not spare them a glance. He came straight for her, into the heat, into the bright, killing center of it, where no sane person would go. "Stay back!" The words tore out of her, warped and desperate. "Stay back! I can't stop it! I can't! You'll burn! Get away from me!" No. He did not stop. He came on through the scorching air with one arm raised against the brightness, his fine clothes singeing, his expression set like stone. "No, you won't burn me. You can't. Listen to me." Closer. The flames guttered where he stepped, dimming, drawing back from him like a tide from a rock. "Granger, Hermione, look at me. Look at my face. Nothing else. Just my face." She looked, and there it was, the cold, the grey composed unmoved calm of him, the one face in all the world that did not yearn, that had never yearned, that looked at her now not with hunger, but with a fierce, furious focus, willing her back to herself. The fire dimmed. The roar in her ears began to quiet. He kept coming, slow and steady, until he was close enough that the flames had shrunk to a flickering corona, until she could see the singe marks on his collar and the bright, cold fear in his eyes that he was holding down by main force. "There you are," he said, low. "There. Keep looking. Don't think about them. Don't think about the fire. Just—" He stopped an arm's length away, and she saw him hesitate, saw the calculation cross his face. And then he did the thing neither of them had ever done. He closed the last of the distance, and he took her hands. His fingers closed around hers, around the lanterns of her hands, into the heart of the flame. And Hermione cried out, certain she would burn him, certain his skin would blacken in her grip. He did not burn. The fire died. It went out all at once, snuffed between his cool palms, and the corridor plunged into ordinary torchlight, and Hermione stood gasping in the sudden dark, with her hands clasped in Draco Malfoy's hands, and her whole body shaking, and the smell of ozone and scorched stone thick in the air around them. For a long moment, neither of them moved. His hands were cold. That was what she would remember. How cold his hands were, cool and dry and steady around her own, which was still faintly warm, the last of the fire ebbing out of her and into him, drawn off like fever into a cold cloth. His grip was firm. He had not let go. He was looking at her with an intensity she had never seen on him, his careful mask gone entirely. And what was underneath it was not contempt and not boredom, but something raw and frightened and astonished. And she understood that he had been afraid, not of her, but for her, for what she might have done and had to live with. "You ran," she said. Her voice came out cracked. "Toward it, into the fire. You could have, if you'd been wrong, if the immunity hadn't, you could have burned." It wasn't wrong. But his jaw was tight, and she saw the truth in the whiteness of it, that he had not been certain, that he had gambled, that he had run into a thing that could have killed him on the chance that he could pull her out. "I knew it would hold." "You didn't know." "No," he admitted after a moment, quietly. "I didn't." They stood there in the wreckage of the corridor with their hands still joined, neither willing to be the one to break it, and Hermione became aware of all of it at once. The cold of his fingers, the warmth where their palms met, the closeness of him, the cedar and stone scent of him cutting through the ozone, the rise and fall of his breath, which was not as steady as he was pretending. The fire was out. There was no danger now. There was no reason left for him to hold her hands. He was still holding her hands. And the third thing, the new thing, the bright, specific shock she had felt in the doorway 9 nights ago, it came again, rolling up her arms from the points of contact, blooming warm in her chest, and it was nothing like the blood and nothing like the cold. It was entirely and only herself, her own want, her own heart hammering for a reason that had no excuse in magic. She looked up at him and found him looking down at her, and saw, in the sudden stillness of his face, that he felt the change in the air too, that whatever was passing between them now was passing in both directions. His thumb moved, the barest stroke across the back of her hand, unconscious or not. Hermione's breath caught. "Malfoy," she whispered. "Don't," he said. But he did not let go, and he did not step back, and his voice had gone rough at the edges. "Don't say anything. It's the magic, the blood. It's not—" He stopped. His eyes searched her face. "It isn't real. Whatever this is. It's only the pull, finding a new shape. It has to be. You're immune to the pull." The words came out before she could weigh them. "It doesn't work on you. It never has." She felt the ground giving way beneath them both, felt the careful truce of 9 evenings cracking open into something neither of them had a map for. "So, if it isn't the magic working on you, then what is it, Draco? What is this?" He had no answer. She watched him search for one, watched the cold, composed boy who always had an answer come up empty, watched the panic rise behind his eyes, watched his careful armor fail him entirely in the torchlit ruin of the corridor with her hands still warm in his cold ones, and the space between them gone to almost nothing. His gaze dropped once to her mouth and came back up, and she saw him realize that she had seen him do it. And then footsteps were ringing down the corridor. McGonagall's voice, sharp with alarm, the 3 fled boys having raised the castle. And Draco Malfoy dropped her hands as though they had burned him after all, and stepped back into the safety of the cold, and the moment shattered into noise and light, and the arrival of every adult in the school. And Hermione stood alone in the space where he had been, her hands still curled around the memory of his, and understood that everything between them had just changed, and that neither of them had the first idea what to do about it. He did not come the next evening. Hermione sat alone behind the frost orchard tapestry with her books spread in their useless fortress around her, and she watched the door, and the hour came and went, and the tapestry rings did not whisper. The fire burned down. A house elf built it up. She did not write a word. By 10 o'clock, the ember in her chest had begun to stir with the agitation of his absence. Not danger, not yet. The room itself seemed to hold some residue of his cooling presence even when he was gone, but a restless, wakeful heat that would not settle, and she understood with a sinking certainty that he was avoiding her, and that he was avoiding her because of what had happened in the corridor, and that the thing which had passed between them with their hands joined had frightened him as badly as it had frightened her. She told herself she was relieved. She was an indifferent liar, even to herself. He came the night after, late, 1/4 the hour, which for Malfoy was as good as a confession, and he did not look at her when he entered. He took his chair at the far end of the table and opened a book and held himself with such rigid, careful stillness that the very air around him seemed to bristle, and Hermione felt the temperature of the room drop several degrees in a way that had nothing to do with magic. "You weren't here last night," she said. I had other commitments. You're a probationary student with no friends and a banned wand. You had no commitments. His jaw tightened. How kind of you to keep such careful inventory of my degradations. I'm not. She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. I wasn't keeping inventory. I noticed you weren't here. That's all. I noticed, and I wondered if it was because of... It wasn't because of anything. He turned a page with a snap. Leave it, Granger. She left it. For an hour she left it, while the silence curdled between them, while he read pages he wasn't reading, and she wrote sentences she immediately struck out, while the gulf that had so nearly closed in the corridor reopened wider than it had ever been. And the worst of it was the loss, because she had not known, until it was gone, how much the wary closeness of those 9 evenings had come to matter to her, how the small dry exchanges and the startled flickers and the unexpected laughter had become a thing she looked forward to. She had let her guard down by inches without noticing, and now the guard was back up, his and hers both, and the room was as cold as the first night, and she hated it. It was the fire that broke the standoff, but not hers. A log shifted in the grate, and a knot of pitch caught and flared, and a spark leapt out onto the hearthstone, and then onto the edge of the worn old rug that lay before the fire, and a small flame began to lick along the frayed wool. It was nothing. A spark, a smoulder, the kind of thing any first year could put out with a flick. Hermione half rose, her wand half drawn. And Draco was already there. He had crossed the room before she understood he had moved, and he dropped to one knee on the hearthstone and beat out the little flame with his bare hand, fast and certain, and without a moment's hesitation, smothering it against the stone. It was out in 3 seconds. It had never been dangerous. But Hermione stood frozen with her wand half raised, staring, because of the way he had done it, the absolute reflexive speed of it, the way his whole body had thrown itself at the small fire before his mind could weigh the cost. And she understood, watching him kneel there, shaking out his stung hand, that this was a man for whom fire was not an abstraction. Your hand, she said. It's nothing. Let me see it. It's nothing, Granger. But he was cradling it against his chest, and his face had gone grey, and he was not looking at the fire. He was looking at nothing, his eyes fixed and far away in a manner she recognized, the somewhere else look, the look she had caught that first evening and not understood. He stayed on one knee on the hearthstone with his back to her, and his burned hand pressed to his chest, and he did not get up. And Hermione, who knew things about Draco Malfoy that she tried very hard not to know, understood at last what she was looking at. Fiend fire, she said quietly. His shoulders went rigid. The room of requirement, she went on, the pieces falling into place, gentle and terrible. Crab's curse, the whole room burning. You were... I was there. I saw it. Harry pulled you out of it. You nearly died in it. You watched your friend die in it. She set her wand down on the table. That's why you ran into my fire without knowing the immunity would hold. It wasn't bravery. Or it wasn't only bravery. You couldn't not run at it. You can't stand by and watch something burn. For a long moment he did not move and did not speak, and the only sound was the small ordinary crackle of the fire he had just made safe. Don't, he said at last. His voice had gone very low. Don't do that. Don't diagnose me. You read a book about Veela, and now you think you can read everything. You can't read me, Granger. You don't know the first thing about... I know you ran into a fire that could have killed you to pull me out of myself. She came around the table slowly and lowered herself to sit on the hearthstone beside him, not touching an arm's length, but down on the floor at his level, where the somewhere else look could not pretend to be above her. I know you came back the next night, even though it frightened you. I know you just put out a spark with your bare hand faster than you could think, because some part of you is always watching for the fire, always ready, always braced. I know you've been carrying that for 1.5 years, and that you'd rather be cruel to me than let me see it. She paused. I'm not diagnosing you. I'm telling you what I saw. He turned his head and looked at her then. Really looked. The cold gone out of his eyes, and what was underneath it undid her, because it was not the contempt she had armoured herself against for 7 years. It was something young and raw and unbearably tired. The face of a boy who had been handed a war he never chose, and a mark he never wanted, and a list of dead he would carry to his grave, and who had spent 1.5 years being despised by people who were not entirely wrong to despise him, and who had stopped, somewhere along the way, expecting anyone to look at him and see anything but the worst of what he'd done. Crab, he said. The name came out cracked. He was not looking at her now. He was looking at his burned hand. I told him not to. The curse. I told him it was too much. He couldn't control it, and he wouldn't. He wanted to impress someone. I don't even know who. There was no one left to impress. And it got away from him, and it ate the room, and it ate him, and I... He stopped. His throat worked. I could hear him, in the fire, for a moment, and then I couldn't. He turned the burned hand over, studying the reddened palm as though it belonged to someone else. I dream about it, the sound of it. I haven't told anyone that. I'm not entirely sure why I'm telling you. Because I burn, Hermione said softly. And you've watched me nearly lose control 3 times now, and every time some part of you is back in that room hearing him, aren't you? It was not a question. It isn't just the immunity that makes you the one who can stop me. It's that you understand it. You know exactly what it costs to be near a fire that could kill you. You've already paid it once. He did not answer. But he did not deny it either, and his uninjured hand had come to rest on the hearthstone between them, close to hers, not quite touching. And Hermione looked at it, at the long, pale fingers, at the inch of scorched air between his skin and hers. And she did the thing she had been not doing for 9 evenings and 1 terrible corridor. She closed the inch. She laid her hand over his, warm over cold, and felt him go absolutely still beneath her touch. Felt the bright, specific shock roll up her arm again. Felt his fingers turn, slowly, slowly, until they were palm to palm, until his cold hand had folded around her warm one on the hearthstone, with the firelight gilding them both, and the whole castle silent around them. "It went out," he said. He was staring at their joined hands. His voice had gone unsteady. "Just now, your fire, the ember, I can feel it. When it stirs in you, there's a charge in the air. I've learned to feel it. It's not stirring now." He swallowed. "It's the calmest I've ever felt you. And I'm not I'm not even trying. I'm not doing anything. I'm just holding your hand." "I know," Hermione whispered. "It's not supposed to work like that." His grip tightened, fractional, helpless. "The immunity dampens the fire when I'm near. That's the magic. That's the arrangement. But this isn't. This is something else. This is..." He raised his eyes to hers, and they were frightened, and they were certain, and the two things together made her heart turn over. "When you touch me, when you choose to, it does something the magic never did. And I don't have a word for it, and it terrifies me, because I have spent my whole life knowing exactly what everything is, and I do not know what this is." The fire crackled. Outside, the lake lay black under a sky thick with winter stars, and somewhere far below the castle, bells began to toll the hour, the slow bronze sound rolling up through the stone and into the soles of their feet where they sat together on the hearth. "Then we'll find a word for it," Hermione said. Her thumb moved across the back of his hand, the way his had moved across hers in the corridor, unconscious or not. "We're the two cleverest people in this castle. Surely between us. Granger." He said her name like a man bracing against a wind. "Hermione." And he lifted his free hand, the burned one, the one that had thrown itself at a fire without thinking, and brought it, trembling, to the side of her face, his cold fingers ghosting along her jaw, his eyes searching hers for the first sign that she would pull away. She did not pull away. She turned her face into his palm instead, and his breath left him all at once, and the space between them on the hearthstone began, slowly, to disappear. His eyes dropping to her mouth, hers to his, the firelight warm on both their faces, and the cold of him bleeding into the warmth of her, until she could not have said where one of them ended and the other began. And from somewhere down the corridor came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, and a voice calling Hermione's name, and the two of them sprang apart on the hearthstone with their hearts hammering, and the moment hanging shattered and shimmering in the firelit air between them, undeclared, unfinished, and utterly impossible now to take back. It was Harry's voice. Of course it was Harry's voice. He came through the tapestry with his wand lit and his face tight with worry, and he stopped short when he saw them. Hermione on her feet beside the hearth, Draco a careful 3 paces away, both of them too still, the air between them thick with everything they had not said. Harry's eyes moved from one to the other. Whatever he read there, he had the grace not to name it. "Sorry," he said. "I heard there was a fire on the 2nd floor the other night, and then someone said they saw smoke from this corridor, and I..." He stopped. He looked at Draco and his jaw worked, and Hermione watched him visibly decide to swallow whatever he had walked in prepared to say. "Are you all right, Hermione?" "I'm fine, Harry. It was a spark from the grate. Malfoy put it out." Harry's eyebrows climbed a fraction. "Malfoy put it out." "With his hand," Hermione said, and immediately wished she hadn't, because Harry's gaze dropped at once to Draco's reddened palm, and something complicated crossed his face. Surprise and reluctant reassessment, and the particular discomfort of a person being made to revise a judgment he had been comfortable holding for years. "Right," Harry said slowly. "Well..." He looked at Hermione again, and there was a question in it, a careful brotherly question that asked, without words, whether she was safe and not from the fire. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. Not now. Not here. Later. He understood. He always understood. I'll let McGonagall know it was nothing. Hermione, come find me tomorrow, yeah? I will. He went. The tapestry fell shut. And the silence he left behind was a different silence than the one before he'd come. The spell of the hearthstone broken, the impossible nearness retreated. Both of them returned abruptly to the cold, hard fact of who they were and where they were and what the world would say. You should go, Draco said. He had turned to face the fire, his back half to her, his voice gone flat and careful again. It's late. Draco, don't. He said it quietly, without heat. Whatever you were going to say, don't. I've had time to think, sitting here, while Potter looked at me like I'd grown a second head. And he's right too. That's the thing you keep forgetting, Granger. You sit there reading me like a book, and you leave out the chapters you don't want to read. He turned, and his face had closed again. But there was something desperate behind the closing. Something that was trying very hard to do the right thing, and hating it. What just happened? On the floor. That wasn't. We have to be honest about what that was. And what was it? It was the magic. He said it like a man laying down a card he did not want to play. Think, Granger. You're cleverer than this. Your blood woke up 6 weeks ago and rewrote how the entire world responds to you. Every person in this castle is drawn to you against their will. And I'm the one exception, the one immunity, the one safe harbor. Of course you feel something when I'm near. Of course it feels like wanting. I'm the only place your nature can rest. That's not love. That's a drowning person reaching for the only thing that floats. That's not. And me. He pressed on, ruthless now, dismantling it piece by piece with the cold precision she had always feared, and now understood was a kind of self-defense. I'm immune to the allure, yes, but I'm not immune to you, to the fact that you're the only person in a year and a half who sat on a floor and looked at me without hating me. Do you understand how dangerous that is? I'm so starved for one decent human look that I'd mistake anything for... He stopped. His jaw tightened. We're two people the world has made desperate in opposite directions, and we've been locked in a room together every night, and we've confused proximity for something it isn't. That's all this is. It has to be, because if it's real... His voice cracked, just slightly, and he mastered it. If it's real, then I have to live with wanting something I have no right to and can never have. And I would rather it were the magic. Do you understand? I would rather it were a lie. The fire popped in the grate. Outside, the wind had risen, and it moaned in the chimney and rattled the old window in its frame. And beyond the glass, the first thin flakes of snow had begun to fall, ghosting down past the black panes. Hermione stood very still and let his words land one by one and felt the awful logic of them. Because he was right. That was the horror of it, that he might be right. She had no way to know. How could she possibly know? Her blood had turned the whole world into a mirror that reflected only want back at her. And Draco was the one true exception, the one face that did not lie to her by yearning. And so, of course, she had reached for him. Of course, her starved and frightened body had found the one safe harbor and called it love. And he, half broken by a year of being despised, had reached back. None of it proved anything. None of it could be trusted. The very thing that made him precious to her, that her allure did not touch him, was also the thing that made her own heart impossible to read. Because how could she tell the difference between loving him and simply needing the only person near whom she did not have to be afraid? "Then we test it," she said. He looked at her. "You want to know whether it's real or whether it's the magic." Her voice was steadier than she felt. She was reasoning now, building the argument the way she built everything, brick by careful brick, and the building of it kept the trembling down. "There's only one way to find out. We separate. Completely. No evening hours. No proximity. We tell McGonagall the arrangement isn't working, and we ask for the potion route, the suppressants, anything, and we stay apart. If what I feel is only the blood reaching for its safe harbour, then with you gone, it'll fade. It'll transfer. I'll find I feel the same desperate pull toward the suppressant draft, or the warded room, or whatever else lets me rest. And if what you feel is only starvation for a kind look, then with me gone, the first person who's decent to you will do just as well." She lifted her chin. "And if it doesn't fade, if being apart from you is worse than the fire, then we'll know it was never the magic at all." A long silence. "That's reckless," Draco said. "Without me near you, the fire. Granger, you nearly burned 3 boys to death in a corridor. If we separate and you lose control with no one to... I'll have the suppressants. I'll be careful. I'll stay away from people." She held his gaze. "Are you afraid I'll fail the test? Or are you afraid I'll pass it?" His knuckles had gone white where he gripped the back of the chair. She watched him war with it, watched the cold rational part of him, the part that wanted it to be a lie, because a lie was safer, line up against whatever else was in him, the part that had run into her fire and put out a spark with his bare hand, and held her hand on the hearthstone as though it were the only warmth left in the world. The rational part won. It always won, with Draco. That was his armor and his prison both. "Fine," he said. "We'll test it. We separate. A fortnight." His voice was clipped, businesslike, and only the whiteness of his knuckles betrayed the cost. 2 weeks apart, suppressants, no contact. If at the end of it you still... He could not finish it. "We'll have our answer. And if the answer is that it was only ever the magic, then we'll both be glad of it, and we'll never speak of any of this again." "Agreed," Hermione said. Neither of them moved to leave. They stood there in the firelit study with the snow falling past the window and the fortnight stretching out ahead of them like a held breath. And Hermione understood that they were both lying, that neither of them believed for one moment it was only the magic, that the test was not a test, but a flinch, a way of buying time, a cowardice dressed up as science. She had proposed it because the truth was too large to face head-on. He had agreed to it for the same reason. And now they stood on the brink of 2 weeks apart, and the snow fell, and the fire burned, and the bells had long since finished tolling, and neither of them could make their feet carry them to the door. Granger. His voice had gone quiet again. The businesslike edge had worn through. "If it does fade, if you stop feeling it, when we're apart..." He was not looking at her. "You won't. I'd like to not know, if that's how it goes. I'd rather you simply stopped coming and never told me which it was." I don't think I could stand to hear you say it was the magic. Not after. He gestured vaguely at the hearthstone, at the inch of air they had closed, and the kiss they had not finished. Not after that. Just stop coming. I'll understand. It was the most undefended thing he had ever said to her. It cracked something open in Hermione's chest that had nothing to do with the blood. A pure, aching tenderness, fierce and certain. And in that moment she knew, with a knowledge that needed no test, exactly what she felt and exactly what it was. But she could not say it. To say it now, on the brink of the test, would be to make the test meaningless. And she needed it to mean something. Needed the proof for his sake, even more than her own. Because Draco Malfoy would never let himself believe a thing he wanted, unless it had been demonstrated past all argument. So she did not say it. She crossed the room instead. She came to him where he stood gripping the chair, and she reached up slowly, giving him every chance to step back, and she laid her warm palm flat against his cold cheek, and felt him shudder, felt his eyes close, felt the ember in her chest go utterly still and quiet at his touch the way it always did, but felt also the other thing, the bright, specific warmth that was hers alone and answered to no magic in the world. For the record, she said softly, I already know what this is. I'm only agreeing to the fortnight because you need the proof, and I'd give you any proof in the world. So, go and have your 2 weeks. Take your suppressants and your distance and your science. Her thumb moved across his cheekbone. And when it doesn't fade, because it won't, Draco, it won't, you come and find me. I won't make you say it, but you come and find me. He opened his eyes. They were bright, too bright, and for one suspended moment, she thought he would abandon the whole foolish test, would close the last of the distance there and then, and make the fortnight unnecessary. And then he stepped back, gently, out of her reach, into the cold, his hands curling into fists at his sides, as though he had to physically hold himself in place. And Hermione let her hand fall to her side, and the two of them stood a careful arm's length apart in the snowlight and the firelight on the first night of a separation that one of them already knew would prove everything, and neither of them said goodbye. The first day apart was bearable. Hermione told herself this with the brisk determination she brought to all difficult things, and she half believed it. She took the suppressant draught Madame Pomfrey brewed for her, bitter silver grey, tasting of crushed moonstone and something colder underneath, and she felt the allure dim to a low murmur, felt the heads turn less sharply when she passed, felt the constant low dread of ignition recede into something almost like the old normal. She attended her classes. She sat in the library. She did not go to the 4th floor study, and she did not let herself look toward it when she passed the corridor. And when Ron asked her at dinner why she seemed so far away, she said she was tired, which was true, and which was not the truth. The first day was bearable. The second was harder. Because the suppressant dimmed the allure, but it did nothing for the fire. The books had been clear on that. The wrath was a deeper thing, rooted in the blood below the reach of any draught. And without Draco's presence to quiet the ember, Hermione found it beginning to stir. Not dangerously, not yet. But she felt it waking in her chest through the long afternoons, a restless, banked heat that the suppressant could not touch. and she understood that she had grown used to a calm she had not earned, had come to rely without knowing it on the cold, steady weight of his nearness, and that without it, she was once again a girl carrying a lit thing in her chest with no sure way to keep it from catching. By the 4th day, she had begun to flinch from people again. By the 5th, she ate alone. And there was the other thing, the worst thing, the thing the suppressant could not even pretend to address. She missed him. Not the safe harbour, not the cooling presence. Him. She missed the dry voice and the startled flickers, and the way he turned a page he wasn't reading. She missed arguing with someone who argued back as well as she did. She missed the somewhere else look and the slow, rare warmth that came over his face when she made him forget to be cold. She lay awake in her stone room at night and found her mind going to him unbidden, again and again, worrying at the memory of his hand folding around hers on the hearthstone, of his burned palm against her cheek, of the inch of air they had closed and the kiss they had not finished. And she knew, with a certainty that grew more total with every passing day, that this was not the blood reaching for its harbour. The blood was restless and wanted only to rest. This was something that had nothing to do with rest at all. This was a wanting that was sharp and specific and made of memory, that could not be transferred to a suppressant draft or a warded room, that belonged to no one and nothing in all the world but Draco Malfoy. She had her answer by the 6th day. She did not break the fortnight. He had needed the proof. She would give him the full measure of it, would let the 2 weeks run their course so that when she came to him, there would be no argument left for him to make, no rational escape hatch. No, it was only the magic to hide behind. So she endured it. She took her bitter draught and she kept her distance, and she carried her waking fire alone through the long, cold days, and she counted them down, and she waited. She did not know what the days were doing to him. He did not take a suppressant. There was nothing to suppress. The allure had never touched him, and the fire was not his to carry. By every rational measure, the fortnight should have cost Draco Malfoy nothing at all. He should have spent it in relief, freed from the nightly obligation, restored to the quiet, anonymous existence he claimed to want. That had been the entire premise of the test, on his side. That without Hermione near, the first kind look from anyone else would prove his feeling a mere starvation, easily fed elsewhere. But there was no one else. That was the thing the test revealed to him, slowly, over the long, empty evenings. That the castle was exactly as full of people who despised him as it had always been. That the only person in 18 months who had sat on a floor and seen something in him worth seeing was the very person he had agreed not to see. He went to the library, and people moved away from his table. He passed his old housemates in the corridors, and they looked through him. He returned each night to his solitary room, and there was no kind look waiting there to feed the supposed starvation, and the starvation did not abate. And he understood, with a dawning dread that was its own kind of fire, that it had never been a general hunger for any decent human face. It had only ever been hunger for hers. He felt her absence the way one feels a missing tooth, the constant compulsive return to the empty place. He found himself at 8 o'clock each evening, drifting, against all sense, toward the 4th floor corridor, and stopping short of the frost orchard tapestry, and standing in the dark passage outside it for long minutes before forcing himself away. He told himself it was concern, that she might be losing control, that without him near the fire might be building, that he had a responsibility. And there was truth in that. He did worry. He lay awake, worrying, picturing her alone in her stone room with the ember waking and no one to quiet it. But underneath the worry was the simpler thing he could not bring himself to name, the thing the test was supposed to disprove, and was instead proving past all denial with every empty evening. That he did not want to be apart from her, that the calm he had always felt in her presence had never been indifference, that the immunity which shielded him from her allure had left him entirely defenseless against the rest of her. Her mind, her fierceness, her terrible, clear-eyed kindness, the way she had looked at him on the hearthstone and seen the boy under the wall. He had agreed to the fortnight because he wanted it to be the magic. He understood now, with cold finality, that there was no magic in what he felt. The magic could not touch him. Everything he felt for Hermione Granger, he had built himself, brick by helpless brick, in a dusty study over 9 quiet evenings. And none of it would fade, and none of it would transfer. And at the end of the fortnight, he would have to do the one thing he had spent his whole life avoiding, which was to want something openly and reach for it and risk being refused. On the 11th night, it nearly ended in catastrophe. Hermione had gone to the astronomy tower because she could not sleep, and the stone room had become unbearable. And she had thought the cold night air might quiet the ember that had been building all day past the suppressant's reach. She was wrong. The air was cold and clean and full of stars. And for a while it helped. And then a group of younger students came up the stair behind her, laughing. And one of them, a boy whose suppressant-dimmed sense of her allure was not dimmed quite enough, said something thoughtless and grasping, reached for her the way the boys in the corridor had reached, and the fire woke. It came up faster than it had in weeks. The suppressant had lulled her into false safety. She had forgotten how quickly it could take her, and the 11 days of building heat poured out all at once. The younger students screamed and fled down the stair. The torches flared. Hermione felt herself going, felt the white roar rising, felt the orderly girl dissolving into flame on the high cold tower with no one to pull her back. No Draco, no cool hands, no grey steady eyes to look at, only the fire and the night and the long terrible drop beyond the parapet. And in the white centre of it, drowning, she did the thing she had done on the very first night, the thing she had not understood then and understood now completely. She reached for him. Not his presence. He was 3 floors away, asleep or not, beyond all reach. But the memory of him, his cold hands folding around hers, his voice cutting through the fire. Look at my face. Nothing else. Just my face. The cedar and stone scent of him. The slow warmth in his eyes on the hearthstone. She held the memory of Draco Malfoy in the white heart of her own inferno and clung to it with everything she had. And the fire guttered. It did not go out. He was not there. Only the real cold of him could put it out. But it guttered, dimmed, drew back from the edge of true catastrophe, held in check by nothing but the memory of him and her own fierce will to come back to herself. And in the dimming, Hermione found just enough of her own mind to gasp out the suppressant charm Pomfrey had taught her, the emergency word, and to sink to her knees on the cold stone as the flames shrank and died around her. She knelt alone on the astronomy tower in the smoking dark, shaking, and understood two things at once with perfect clarity. The first was that the test was over. There was no longer any question of what she felt or whether it would fade. She had just held him in her heart through a fire that could have killed her, and it was not the blood that had reached for him. The blood wanted only to burn. It was all the rest of her. The second was that she could not wait 3 more days. She came down off the tower with the soot still on her hands and her decision made, and she did not go to her room. She went to the 4th floor, to the frost orchard tapestry, on the wild chance that he might be there, that he might be doing the thing he had been doing every night without her knowing, drifting to the corridor, standing in the dark outside the door he could not make himself enter. He was there. She came around the corner and found him standing in the dark passage outside the tapestry, perfectly still, his pale hair catching the faint light from the far window, his face turned toward the door he had not gone through. He had heard the commotion 3 floors up. The whole castle had heard it, and he had come, the way he always came, drawn toward her fire against all sense, and stopped short because the fortnight was not over and he had given his word. He turned at the sound of her step. His eyes found her, the soot on her hands, the singed edge of her sleeve, the wildness in her face. And whatever he had braced himself to say died in his throat. "It's not the magic," Hermione said. Her voice shook. She did not care. "I know it isn't, and you know it isn't, and I'm not waiting 3 more days to pretend we don't. The fire took me on the tower just now, Draco. You weren't there. And do you know what I reached for? Do you know what brought me back?" She took a step toward him in the dark corridor, the snow falling past the high window beyond, the whole castle silent and sleeping around them. "It was you, the thought of you, not the harbour, not the calm, you. And if that's not proof enough for your science, then I don't know what is, because I have just proved it in the only laboratory that matters. And the answer is..." She did not finish. Because he had closed the distance between them in 2 strides and taken her soot-stained face in both his cold hands. And the look on his face was not cold at all. It was undone. It was certain. It was a man who had spent 11 nights standing outside a door he wanted to walk through more than he had ever wanted anything. And Hermione's breath caught, and the bells of the castle began, very far below, to toll the late hour into the dark. He kissed her. There, in the dark of the 4th floor corridor, with the snow ghosting past the high window, and the bells tolling far below, and the soot still warm on her skin, Draco Malfoy lowered his mouth to hers and kissed her, and the whole long ache of 11 nights and 9 evenings and 1 unfinished moment on a hearthstone poured into it. His cold hands cradled her face. Her warm hands found the front of his robes and held on. And the ember in Hermione's chest, which the suppressant could not touch and the distance had inflamed, went utterly and completely still. Not because his nearness dampened it, though it did, but because for the first time in 8 weeks, her whole self was somewhere it wished to be, and a thing that is at rest does not burn. It was not a gentle kiss. There was too much in it for gentleness, too much fear survived, too much wanting denied, too much proof finally surrendered to. He kissed her like a man who had decided to stop being careful, and she kissed him back like a girl who had been waiting for him to decide. And when they finally broke apart, they were both shaking, foreheads pressed together, breathing the same cold air. "That wasn't the magic," he said. His voice was wrecked. "I felt nothing the whole fortnight. No pull, no allure. You weren't even near me. And I have never wanted anything the way I wanted to walk through that door. There's no magic in me to blame, Granger. It's just you. It's only ever been you." "I know," Hermione whispered. "I told you it would be." "You did." A breath that was almost a laugh. "Insufferable. Even now, you love it." He went still, and then, very quietly, with the careful precision of a man laying down something he had carried a long way. "Yes, I'm rather afraid I do." They stood together in the dark, and Hermione thought the worst was over. Thought that the only war left was the small, ordinary one of two people learning each other, the kind of war that was almost entirely peace. She was wrong. The blood was not finished with her, and the world was not finished with them, and the true test of what they had just sworn was still 3 days away, and would come in fire. It came on the night the fortnight should have ended. They had not separated again after the corridor. The test was over. They both knew it. And McGonagall, informed that the arrangement would resume, had given Hermione a long, unreadable look over her spectacles, and said only that she trusted them both to remember the school slept around them. So the evenings in the Frost Orchard study resumed, but they were different now. The long table abandoned, the fortress of books dismantled, the two of them on the hearthstone with the firelight on their faces and the cold of him bleeding into the warmth of her, talking, arguing, falling silent, learning the new grammar of being allowed to touch. Hermione had not been so happy in months. She had not been so unguarded in years. And it was precisely because she was unguarded that the blood found its opening. It happened in the great hall at breakfast in front of the whole school. She had begun coming to meals again. Draco's presence 2 seats down kept the ember quiet, and the suppressant managed the rest. And for the first time in 8 weeks, Hermione had let herself believe she might have her life back. She was laughing at something Ginny said. She was reaching for the marmalade. And across the hall at the Slytherin table, a knot of older students who had never forgiven Draco Malfoy. His survival decided that the war hero on his arm made him a target worth striking. She did not hear all of it. She heard enough. She heard the word they used for him, the old word, the cruel one, Death Eater's whelp. And she heard the laughter, and she heard one of them say, loud enough to carry, that they were surprised the Granger girl would let the mark touch her. But then mudbloods never did have any standards. And she saw Draco go very still, 2 seats down, saw his face shut like a door, saw him absorb it the way he had learned to absorb everything, in silence, expecting no defense, because no one had defended him in 18 months. And the fire woke, not for herself. The slur against her own blood she could have borne. She had borne worse, for years, and the suppressant held it in check. It was the other thing, the casual cruelty aimed at him, the mark, the whelp, the laughter, the sight of him bracing to swallow it alone. that struck the ember in her chest like flint on steel. It came up faster than it ever had. It came up with the full force of 8 weeks and 11 nights, and one kiss in a dark corridor behind it. The marmalade jar shattered in her hand. The candles down the length of the Gryffindor table flared to towering columns of flame. Students screamed and scrambled back. And Hermione rose from the bench with fire wreathing her arms, and her hair lifting, and her eyes gone bright as forge light, and turned toward the Slytherin table and the smirking boys who had hurt the person she loved, and in that white, roaring moment she wanted, with the whole force of her woken blood, to burn them. "Hermione!" Ginny's voice, thin with terror. "Hermione! Your hands!" She did not hear it. The hall had become noise and light, and the white pressure of the fire, and the orderly girl was gone, dissolved. And what stood in her place was the thing the books had described in their flat clinical language. The Veela in true wrath, beautiful and terrible, and entirely without governance. The flames spread down the table. The banners overhead began to smoke. Professors were on their feet, wands drawn, shouting. The suppressant charm was useless. She was too far gone to speak it. And the Slytherin boys had stopped smirking and gone white and frozen as the burning girl turned the full weight of her ruin toward them. And Draco moved. He did not draw his wand. He did not run for cover with the others. He walked straight into the fire, straight up the center of the burning hall, through the screaming and the smoke and the towering flame, the way he had walked into the corridor, the way he had thrown himself at the spark on the rug, because he could not stand by and watch something burn. And he would not, now, watch her burn herself to ash over him. The flames roared higher as he came. They did not touch him. He walked through the heart of the inferno she had made, and he came to her where she stood wreathed in killing fire, with her eyes gone bright and blind, and he did not flinch, and he did not stop. "Granger!" His voice cutting through the roar. "Hermione! Look at me!" She turned. The fire turned with her, and for one instant the whole burning weight of it swung toward him, and the hall screamed as one, certain they were watching a boy die. He took her face in his hands, in the white center of the flame, with the fire that should have charred him to bone licking harmlessly around his wrists. Draco Malfoy held Hermione's burning face between his 2 cold palms and looked into her bright, blind eyes. And he did not say, "Stop," and he did not say, "Put it out," and he did not flinch from the inferno she had become. "I'm not worth it," he said, quietly, just for her, under the roar. "Whatever they said, it's not worth this. It's not worth you. Do you understand? Come back. They're nothing. Come back to me." And the fire heard him. It guttered. It dimmed. The white roar in Hermione's ears began to break apart, and through it she heard his voice and felt his cold hands and saw, swimming up through the brightness, the one face in all the world that did not yearn and did not lie, and had walked through her fire to reach her. And the orderly girl came back all at once, flooding into the burning thing and quieting it, because she was no longer alone in the fire, because the thing she loved was standing in the heart of it, holding her face and telling her to come home. The flames went out. The great hall plunged into smoke and silence. The banners smouldered overhead. Marmalade and broken glass and scorched wood lay scattered the length of the Gryffindor table. And in the sudden quiet, In the center of the ruin, Hermione Granger stood gasping in Draco Malfoy's hands, with the last of the fire ebbing out of her and into his cold, steady grip, the whole school staring, every professor frozen, the silence absolute. "You walked into it," she whispered. Her voice broke. The horror of it was arriving now, what she had nearly done, what he had risked to stop her. In front of everyone. You walked into the fire in front of the whole school. Draco, they could see you. They all saw. They'll know. Let them know. He had not let go of her face. His thumbs moved across her cheekbones, wiping soot, and his eyes were bright and fierce and entirely undefended in front of 500 staring students and a dozen staring professors. Let them all know. I'm finished hiding. I spent a year trying to be invisible, and it bought me nothing. And then you sat down on a floor and looked at me, and... His voice caught. I would rather be seen standing in your fire than safe and alone in the dark. So let them know. The hall was utterly silent. Somewhere, a banner gave a last smoking sigh and went out. And Hermione, soot-streaked and shaking, and held in the cold, steady hands of the boy who had walked through her inferno to bring her home, became aware of the staring faces, of McGonagall's astonishment, of Ron's slack-jawed shock, and Harry's slow dawning understanding, and the whole school's held breath, and found that she did not care about any of it, not one whit, because Draco Malfoy had just stood in the center of a fire that could have killed him and told the world he was finished hiding. And she rose up on her toes in front of all of them, in the smoking ruin of the great hall, and she kissed him. Spring came late to the castle that year, and slowly, the way it always did in the high cold north, the lake unlocking from its grey skin of ice, the forest going from black to the first bruised green, the snow retreating from the courtyards inch by reluctant inch, until only the shadowed corners held it. By the time the thaw was complete, a great deal had changed, and not only in the weather. The kiss in the great hall had become, within a single morning, the most discussed event in the school since the war. There was no helping that. 500 witnesses ensured it. For a few days, Hermione had braced for the worst. The whispers, the disbelief, the inevitable interrogation from Ron, the slow, careful disappointment she expected from people who could not understand how the brightest witch of her age had ended up kissing Draco Malfoy in the ashes of the breakfast table. Some of that came, not all of it. Ron had been the hardest, and the conversation they'd had in the empty common room had been long and difficult, and full of things neither of them said well. But at the end of it, he had looked at her, really looked, and said in a low, gruff voice that he supposed Malfoy had walked into a fire for her in front of the whole school, and that he didn't know many blokes who do that, and that if she was happy, and here he'd had to stop and look at the floor for a moment, then he'd find a way to be glad of it. It was not a benediction. It was better than that. It was the truth given at cost by someone who loved her. Harry had been simpler. Harry had watched Draco Malfoy walk into an inferno and come out the other side holding Hermione's face. And Harry, who had once watched the same boy nearly die in another fire and had pulled him out of it, had said only, "I never thought I'd say this, but he's not the person he was. And he made you happy this whole term, and I was too thick to see why." He'd paused. I'm not going to be his friend, Hermione, but I'll stop being his enemy. That's the best I've got." It was, again, the truth, given honestly, and Hermione had hugged him hard enough to make him grunt. The school, in the end, did what schools do. It gossiped itself hoarse and then moved on to the next thing. And the strangest part, the part Hermione had not anticipated, was what it did to Draco. It saw him. That had been the bargain he'd made, standing in her fire. Let them know, I'm finished hiding. And the school had taken him at his word. It had watched a boy who'd spent 18 months as a ghost in his own life walk into a fire that could have killed him for the sake of a muggle-born girl. And something in the collective judgment of 500 children had shifted, slowly, the way the ice shifted on the lake. He was not forgiven all at once. Some things are not forgiven all at once, and should not be. But he was looked at differently. People stopped moving away from his table. A second year he'd helped with a charms problem said thank you and meant it. And Draco Malfoy, who had come back to Hogwarts expecting nothing and braced to receive it, began, warily, disbelievingly by inches, to take up space in the world again, as though he had finally been given permission to exist. Hermione watched it happen and understood that she had not only fallen in love with him, she had, somehow, by accident and by fire, given him back to himself. The matter of her blood was not solved by love. She had been too good a student ever to believe a story so neat. The fire was hers now, and would always be hers. The Veela inheritance did not unwake. But it could be governed, and Draco's presence was no longer the only thing that governed it, because the deepest truth the long fortnight had taught her was that the fire fed on fear and shame and loneliness, and that she was, for the first time in her life, less afraid and less ashamed and far less alone. She still took the suppressant for the allure, though the dose grew smaller as she learned to dampen it herself. She still found the ember waking in moments of high feeling, but she had learned to reach for stillness instead of grasping at it. And stillness, it turned out, was easier to find when there was someone beside you whose hand you could simply take. And there was always someone beside her now. They had given up the pretense of the supervised study hours by April. McGonagall, who missed very little, had quietly stopped sending the reminders, and the Frost Orchard tapestry had become not a cage, but a refuge. A place they went because they wished to, not because the ministry required it. They spent their evenings there still, on the hearthstone, surrounded by the books neither of them could ever resist, arguing about everything and agreeing about almost nothing, and falling silent in the comfortable way of two people who have finally stopped having to defend themselves. The cold of him still bled into the warmth of her. The ember still went quiet at his touch. But the quiet was no longer the point. The point was the rest of it. The dry voice and the slow, rare warmth, and the way he looked at her now, openly, with no armor left, as though she were the single warm thing in a life that had been cold a very long time. On the last evening before the summer holidays, they walked down to the lake together in the long blue dusk. The thaw was complete now. The water lay calm and dark, and the first stars were pricking out above the forest, and the air was soft with the green smell of the new season, of wet earth and crushed grass, and the faint, cold breath off the water. They walked without speaking for a while, her warm hand in his cold one, the castle rising lit and golden behind them. And Hermione, who had spent the whole term certain of what she felt and never once saying it aloud, because he had needed proof, and then because there had never seemed a right moment, and then simply because some true things are hard to say even when they are no longer in doubt, found that she could not let the year end without saying it. Draco. She stopped at the water's edge. I have to tell you something, and I need you not to make it strange. He turned to face her, wary in the old reflexive way, and she saw him brace. That's an alarming way to begin. I love you. She said it plainly, the way she said true things, with no ornament and no escape. I have for a long time. Since before the corridor, I think, though I didn't let myself know it. I'm not saying it because of the blood or the fire, or because you're the only one who can calm me. I worked all that out months ago, on a tower, in a fire, with you 3 floors away. I'm saying it because it's simply true, and I'm tired of carrying a true thing around without saying it. She lifted her chin. There, I've said it. You don't have to. He kissed her. He did it the way he had done it in the corridor, the way he did everything that mattered now, without hesitation, without armor, his cold hands coming up to cradle her face in the blue dusk with the lake at their feet and the stars coming out above the forest. And when he drew back, his forehead resting against hers, his voice was low and unsteady and certain. I love you, he said. I've been trying to find a way to say it that wasn't terrifying, and there isn't one. So I'll just... I love you, Granger. Hermione, you walked into my year of being no one, and you looked at me as though I was someone, and I will never, as long as I live, be able to repay that. He pulled back enough to look at her, and there was no cold in him at all now. None. Only the warm, undefended thing she had spent a whole term coaxing out into the light. I spent 18 months, certain the best thing I could do with the rest of my life was disappear quietly and trouble no one. And then a fire woke up in your blood, and the whole castle went mad for you. And the universe, in what I can only assume was a fit of cosmic irony, decided that the one person who could stand beside you without losing his mind was me. A breath that was almost a laugh. I thought it was a sentence, a punishment. The 2 of us locked in a room together. I have never in my life been so grateful to have been so wrong. The water lapped at the shore. Somewhere behind them in the castle, a window opened and a snatch of music drifted out and was gone. The first true stars had come out now, thick above the dark line of the forest, and the lake held them all, doubled, trembling on the calm black water. It worked, you know, Hermione said softly. The arrangement, McGonagall's mad arrangement, the whole thing, it made me safe. She slid her arms around him, her warm hands flat against his back, and felt him hold her, felt the ember in her chest go still and quiet and content, not because he dampened it, but because she was exactly where she wished to be. I'm not dangerous anymore. Not really. I can govern it now. I don't need you to keep the world safe from me, Draco. I worked that out months ago, too. I know, he said into her hair. So you should know. She pulled back to look at him, to make sure he heard it. Whatever happens next, this summer, next year, after, I'm not here because I need you to put out my fire. That's not what this is anymore. I could manage it now without you, if I had to. She held his gaze. I just don't want to. That's the whole of it. I don't need you to keep me safe. I want you anyway. There's a difference, and it's the only thing that's ever mattered, and I needed you to know that I know it. She watched the words land. She watched the last shadow of the old fear. The fear that he was only ever a function, a fire blanket, a cold antidote the magic had chosen for her. Go out of his eyes for good. And she watched what replaced it, which was something she had no clinical word for and did not need one for. A man, finally, completely, simply believed in, by the one person whose belief he had stopped daring to hope for. Then we're agreed, Draco said. The old dry note was back, but underneath it ran something so warm and so certain that it made her throat ache. You don't need me. I don't keep you safe. The ministry can take its arrangement and file it under no longer required. He drew her in again, against the cold and the warmth of him both, with the stars wheeling slow above the lake and the whole bright, impossible future spread out ahead of them like the water. We're just two people who chose each other, freely, with no magic to blame and no danger to excuse it. His lips brushed her temple, which is, I'm fairly sure, the only kind of love worth having in the first place. And there, at the edge of the unlocked lake, in the soft green dark of the late northern spring, with the fire in her blood gone quiet, not from his presence, but from her own hard-won peace, Hermione Granger rose up on her toes and kissed Draco Malfoy. Not because the world was in danger, not because her nature demanded it, not because any spell or sentence or arrangement required it of either of them, but only and entirely because she wanted to. And he kissed her back the same way, freely, gladly. A boy who had walked through fire and come out the other side warm at last, and the stars looked down on the two of them, and the still water held their reflection doubled and trembling and whole.
So that is the end of the story. Thank you for staying until the last word. I want to tell you why I wrote this one. I have always loved the idea of two people who think they are wrong for each other. They fight, they build walls, and then slowly the walls fall down. Hermione was afraid of her own fire. She thought she was dangerous. She thought she needed Draco only to stay safe. But that was not the real story. The real story was simpler than that. My favorite moment is at the very end by the lake. She looks at him and says, I don't need you to keep me safe. I want you anyway. For me, that one line is the whole story. It is the difference between needing someone and choosing someone, because real love is not about being saved, it is about being seen. Draco spent a long time feels like no one, and she looked at him and saw someone. I hope this story made you feel something tonight. Maybe it reminded you of someone. Maybe it gave you a little hope. If you like it, stay with me. There are more stories coming, and every one of them is about the same thing: two hearts finding their way home. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next story.